All right, hello and welcome to our second genetic screencast. And today we're going to talk about the granddaddy of all genetics, Gregor Mendel. He's the king. Mendel, who was a monk, okay, is the one who kind of did everything about genetics. He discovered all the principles of genetics. And Mendel had a couple of things going for him, and that's what we're going to talk about in this screencast, that is basically kind of ensured his success. Okay. But he, like I said, he's considered the grandfather, the granddaddy, the Mac Daddy of all genetics. And he discovered the patterns of inheritance, a lot of essential facts about genes, alleles, distribution of alleles, gametes, zygotes during sexual reproduction, kind of the relationship between all of this stuff. Okay. He chose pea plants for his experiments, and this is because he was the gardener at the monastery. Again, it says Mendel's background allowed him to see patterns. The great thing about Mendel's background is that he was a monk. And so he had the time. He didn't have to have a job or do anything. He had the time, he had the money to do all of these experiments. So that was good. And we're going to talk a little bit more about his experience, but basically his ability to recognize the patterns of inheritance is working in his favor. He was a very observant kind of guy. And there he is, Mendel. Looking very monkish. Okay, so the secrets of Mendel's success. First of all, I should say like one half. The greatest thing about Mendel is that he was actually pretty darn lucky. He happened to choose the right organism. He happened to just be able to see it. Everything was very simple in the pea plants. And so he was really pretty lucky in kind of how everything lined up. Okay. But he also was a great scientist, and he applied 3 key scientific steps to his research that was different from what a lot of other people had done. He chose the right organism to work with. It turns out, and we'll talk more about pea plants in the next screencast, but it was just ideal. It ended up being perfect. Designing and performing the experiment correctly, which means getting lots of data, like numbers, high numbers of offspring, and also repetition. He repeated his experiments. Okay. And then once he got all of his data, tons and tons of data, he analyzed the data properly. He looked at ratios, he looked at probabilities, and so he did a lot of number crunching. And so because of doing that, he could see patterns, very obvious patterns emerge. So let's talk a little bit about pea plants. Pea plants have great qualities that make them a good organism for studying inheritance. And we're going to look a lot about gametes and fertilization. So you still need to know all your meiosis here. Okay. The male part of pea flowers is the stamen. That's the male structure. They produce pollen, which contain the sperm, which are the male gametes. Okay. So sperm are gametes, and pollen is the vehicle that gets the male gametes to where they need to be. Pea flowers also have a female structure called carpel. Okay. And this, in carpels is where we find the ovaries, which produce our female gametes, which are the eggs. Okay. And these two are right next to each other. Okay. The flower petals enclose both the male and female flower parts, and they prevent entry of pollen from other pea plants. And what this does, and here's a picture of how you can see this is an intact pea flower, and you can see everything's kind of closed up in this area. But if you pry it open, you can see here's the female part, or the carpel, and then these are the male parts, or the stamen. So this is where the eggs are produced. This is where the sperm is produced. Okay. Because of their structure, because everything is closed up and protected like this, okay, pea plants naturally self-fertilize, okay, which means the gametes, the male gametes, self-fertilize the female gametes of the same plant. So even though you have sexual reproduction, you have a sperm and you have an egg, they're both from the same parent. So there's only one parent, okay? All right, so pollen and sperm from the stamen transfers to the carpel of the same plant, and then the sperm fertilizes the eggs, okay? But there's only one parent, okay? So it's still undergone meiosis, so there's still genetic variability within the gametes, but it's much, much more limited as it would be with the fusion of gametes from other plants. Okay, so cool thing number one, they naturally self-fertilize. Okay, now Mendel was able to do other things, and he was actually able to forcefully mate two different plants by hand, and we call this cross-fertilization. Okay, so he took a little paintbrush, and he swept off some pollen from the stamens of one plant, okay, and dusted it onto the carpel of another plant. So here's one flower, and here's the other flower, and stamens there. I didn't draw this very prettily, but you get the point. But Mendel did some cross-fertilization as well. Okay. Mendel chose a very simple experimental design. And basically, that's kind of keeping everything normal and choosing one thing at a time to look at. So he studied individual characteristics, which he called traits. Okay. And if you remember from the previous, our trait is going to be the same thing as a gene. Okay. And the traits had different forms, which are our alleles. Okay, such as white versus purple. So the trait or the gene would be flower color. And the alleles, different forms of the gene, would be purple and white. Okay. And he started out, again, by studying only one trait at a time. He didn't try to bring too many things in to make it more complicated. And Mendel did, as I said before, a lot of number crunching. He collected a ton of data. He wouldn't cross one pea plant. He would cross 100 pea plants. He wouldn't just make, 10 offspring. He would make 1,000 offspring. Okay, so, and he followed these traits for several generations. So he would look at 1,000 offspring per generation for 4 generations. Okay, so that's 4,000 data points altogether. So he had the numbers, and when we talk about probability, okay, the more numbers you have, the more kind of real your data is, okay? And it made it much easier for him to sense the patterns of inheritance emerge by getting all these numbers, okay? So that's kind of Mendel in a nutshell, okay? Just a little bit of background on him, on what made his experiments work and what made them special, and just a little bit of background information. And so now we're going to move on to the data. On to the data.